It's the Elephant in the Dome, the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus. I'm Trace Ellis with Senator Chris Gildon. And Senator Gildon, the governor tells us that he's sick of hearing from you and other Republicans complaining about gas prices. You wrote a letter saying, hey, listen, gas prices are high. Is there anything you could do to bring those down? He just recently came out, and that's basically what he said, that he's sick of hearing from Republicans on this.
I think
your letter. What do you think?
I think his quote was, "If I hear one more Republican legislator complain about the price of gas, my head will explode."
Well, we don't want that to happen.
So, but I think that's an unfortunate statement because the people I talk to, their heads and their wallets are exploding every time they go to the pump or they open up their electric bills. You know, it is out of control, and the governor certainly has the authority to do it. To put a pause to the Climate Commitment Act and save about 50-ish cents per gallon. But it's not just the price that people pay at the pump, Tracy. It's much more far-reaching than that. It goes to your individual electric bills. I know I've had a lot of emails about complaining about the Puget Sound energy rate increases that have been happening. That's a direct result of the Climate Commitment Act. And it goes even further than that, and people don't talk about it because all of these rate increases also affect public school buildings. They affect city and county buildings, and all of those dollars that are going to the increased cost of energy because of the CCA, every one of those is less dollars that's going to provide services and supports to the people that they represent.
I mean, he makes the point, you've been intellectually honest about this. You've said, yes, absolutely, the war in Iran has impacted fuel prices, obviously. He says, call the president if you want to do something about fuel prices. Last time I checked, and, it's been hovering around $5.15 or so a gallon here in Washington, much more than the national average, much more than what our neighbors in Oregon, which is also a Democrat state, and Idaho, more Republican state. But, those are our neighbors. It's less there. So is he missing the point a little bit when he says, oh, blame the president? Okay, yes, war in Iran with the Strait of Hormuz and everything, that has certainly caused gas prices throughout the world to go up. But, you're making the point, it's like, yeah, but why are they so much higher here?
Yeah, exactly. And to be clear, I think it's just political deflection. It's the easy thing to do is to blame the federal government, the war with Iran, maintenance on the pipelines, or whatever you do. But it's the consistent blame of something outward and zero ownership of items that were within your control, policy that your party passed. There is zero responsibility there. I think it's interesting that they can say that prices are high, but it's entirely caused by stuff that's elsewhere. Or they say that we are deeply involved in energy policy, and we've created one of the most complex and ambitious carbon pricing schemes in the nation, but that has zero effect on the price that you pay for gas and home electricity. It's always someone else's fault. And I think, that's the type of selective accounting that would really embarrass a professional auditor. And I just ask let's be intellectually honest. Let's just tell the truth. Yes, all of this, the national level, the war with Iran, everything, it all has an impact. We cannot affect the war with Iran. Washington State cannot affect the war with Iran. Washington State can affect policies that are passed within the borders of Washington State, such as the Climate Commitment Act. And Washington State, if we had the resolve, can save people in Washington about 50 cents per gallon almost immediately and provide relief to people all across our state if they were intellectually consistent and intellectually honest, which, in my opinion, they're not being.
The revenue forecast, we should let people know here what these revenue forecasts are. We talk about it, and I think people are like, what are they talking about, revenue forecast? Well, the state has to figure out how much money is coming in so it knows how much money to spend. And the state has this these experts, they seem to do a pretty good job at it. I mean, they aren't perfect. When you're predicting the future, it's always hard. But, who can kind of figure out what the costs are going to be and how the economy is doing, how much money we're bringing in. This was interesting because there was a fear there for a moment that the budget wasn't going to be balanced. And if that happens, so unlike the federal government, the state government has to have a balanced budget. And if it's not balanced, you got to come back into session, basically a special session, and fix it. They got lucky because a bunch of people apparently here in Washington sold their stocks, so the capital gains income tax money came in higher than expected, which saved us. But beyond that, looking at the revenue forecast, which you're heavily involved in as the Senate Republican lead on the budget, it looked a little bit alarming, didn't it?
Yeah, so we get an updated revenue forecast about every quarter from the state economist. Very capable team, and they try to be as nonpartisan as they can and just give the numbers. And it was interesting, backing up just a little bit, is the budget that was passed this last year, they actually spent $5 billion more than the state economist said that we were going to receive. So the state economist said we were going to receive about $75 billion in revenue. The majority party spent $80 billion, right? So they do good work.
I hate to interrupt here, but some people don't. I've had people comment about this, so I wanted to make it clear here. The majority party, when we're talking about that, in the state of Washington, the majority party are Democrats. So when he says the majority party, he means Democrats. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, correct. So while we have really good state economists, the Democrats, the majority party, don't always listen to them. And that's one of the reasons that I've consistently said the budget that was passed was a house of cards built on a shaky foundation. It was structurally unsound. Well, it's structurally unsound because they knowingly spent more money than they had coming in. And to make matters worse, you mentioned that they have to have a balanced budget. Well, they have to have a balanced budget in the 2-year cycle. If it's outside of the 2-year cycle, it doesn't have to balance, right? And that was the budget that they passed this year. So in 2027, the budget as it passed Olympia is scheduled to be underwater by $878 million, right? So that's the situation that we're in right now. And this year, the budget as it passed Olympia, it was, kind of on the bubble. It was basically zero balance. We had a couple of $100 million, which in the bank, which when you're talking billions of dollars, a couple of $100 million is not that much in scale. So the revenue forecast this time came in a little bit higher because of the capital gains increased. Now, some of that was because, people sold off stocks. Some of that was because of an accounting maneuver where a certain amount of dollars, I think it was about $700 million, $500 million, was supposed to go to the capital budget. But the legislature diverted that to the operating budget. So that is one of the reasons why that the operating budget looks better than it would have otherwise. And the Democrat chair of the of the Ways and Means Committee actually called the revenue forecast a mixed bag for that very reason, because had that money not been diverted from the capital budget to the operating budget, it would be a little bit of a different story right now.
We should also let people know how these budgets work. The operating budget pays for most of the stuff in Washington, the day-to-day activities of the state. Capital budget's for construction, basically, and then there's the transportation budget, which is obvious for transportation. Capital budget and transportation budgets have a tendency to be bipartisan, and they have been for as long as I've been here. So it's interesting. I'm sure the capital budget chair and also the ranking on the capital budget, Senator Schessler, weren't too happy with taking away from the capital budget to put in the operating. Yeah. But, whatever. But, the bottom line is that sounds like a shell game to me. You're kind of moving things around and hoping to long run. Is that going to work? I mean, what's the outlook for 4 years, for 6 years? We only look 4 years out, but, is this sustainable?
No, it's not sustainable. And actually, we're heading into a legislative session where the governor has already said that we're going to be facing a budget shortfall, a pretty sizable budget shortfall. And he has sent out notices to all of the departments saying, hey, don't do anything new. We're looking at reductions. You're going to have to be very frugal with the budget coming up. Now, how that translates whenever that the legislature gets a hold of the budget, we will see, because since the Democrats took majority of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion just a few years ago, they have averaged better than 12% growth year after year of the state budget. That's an incredible amount of growth. As a matter of fact, in the last decade, the state budget has more than doubled, Tracy.
Here's a question for you. One of the Democrats at that revenue forecast said that somebody, you made the case that, this is a spending problem, right? I mean, there are only two ways to balance a budget. We all know this. You bring in more money or you spend less money, right? So it's
Sure.
like when it comes to government, that means you either raise taxes or you make cuts. And the Democrat said, no, I want to push back on this. I don't think it's spending that caused this issue. In Cheese, it seems like a very
Well, and I pushed
smart
back
person.
on that idea as well.
Yeah,
because
no,
the
you
notion
did.
that it's not a spending problem
Yeah,
is
you did
absolutely
push back.
ridiculous.
Yeah. Now that's interesting to me. I mean, I was surprised to hear her say that because obviously, you don't get to the situation without spending. But did that kind of shock you that she would even say that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I pushed back during the meeting, which I don't typically do. I typically have those conversations offline, but that was such a ridiculous statement that I felt it needed immediate comment so that it could get out into the press. Whenever you are increasing spending better than 12% per year, that is an incredible. Even Governor Gregoire has come out and said that Olympia has a spending problem. Whenever a former Democrat governor comes out and says such strong words against her own party, there's a there.
Right. Interesting. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, the governor says he won't raise taxes, but
Well, okay, that's an interesting. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because that's a really interesting comment that he made. He said he will not have a budget that raises taxes. Okay, that's a very convenient thing for him to say, because by statute, he has to propose a budget that does not include tax increases. That's the law. He has to do that. Now, he could do like Governor Inslee did on his way out when he, rode off into the political sunset, is he proposed a budget with, some of the largest tax increases ever. So he did propose one budget that had no new taxes, but that was his throwaway budget. And then the real budget that he wanted was the one with all of the new taxes.
And the governor did not say he would veto any new taxes.
Right.
And so the Democrats' last two sessions have raised taxes to deal with revenue. One of those increases was the income tax that they approved, but they aren't going to start collecting, if it survives everything, they aren't going to start collecting money from that until 2029. So that's not going to fix this problem right now. Do you think they'll do it again? Do you think they'll raise taxes again? I mean, how else? They're either going to cut a lot or they're going to raise taxes, right?
Well, and let me just read the political tea leaves on the wall. So where is the Democrat Party in Washington State? They are very progressive in Washington State, obviously, and there are a number of them that are openly socialist. Even so, there is a real desire within the majority party to move even further left than they are. They don't think that they're far enough left as they are. And I do hope that there is a time that the state legislature can come back to the center and find a more balanced approach to policy, to legislation, to budgeting. Because while being in the center politically is not, you don't get a lot of headlines whenever you do that, but that's where good policy is made.
Well, and an example of that is really the World Cup. We talk about what is wrong in Washington a lot here. That's just part of being the minority party in the Senate. That's what we're going to do. But, one of the things that's gone right so far, at least, is the World Cup. The legislature dedicated $5 million in funds towards security for that. It was bipartisan. You know, sometimes things work out, and it seems to be happening with the World Cup. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that, you know, the World Cup is an example of what happens whenever you do something right, right? So far, it seems that everything is going well, everything is orderly, you know, and I think this is certainly an example of what happens whenever we do things right and we work together. And I think it shows if political leaders have the will to do something, that they can actually make it happen. You know, like downtown Seattle right now is not the downtown Seattle it was just a few months ago. It's much cleaner, it's much safer, and people who are visiting our state, I think, are coming away with a really good impression. But my question is, why can't we just do this all the time? Why can't we just have consistency and excellence over time rather than sporadically whenever we're on the world stage?
You know, I mean, it is nice to hear people who are visiting from other countries say how much they love the state, how much they're enjoying their time here. And you've said before, you know, it's a great state. You know, while the politics may not be exactly, you know, what you want, you know, you didn't have to settle here. You could have been anywhere in the country after you get done with your military service, right? And you chose Washington, so you obviously you like it. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately, since we just celebrated our 250th birthday for the United States, is that there are some people out there who I think really have a very intense relationship with what this country is all about. And I've always thought people who served in the military and people who are elected maybe have a sense of that more than some of the rest of us do. Now, since you did both, you served in wars and you've been elected to the legislature, both the House and the Senate. I mean, what are your thoughts about America at 250?
You know, I think America is still the land of opportunity, right? Freedom, opportunity. I wish that more Americans could actually go visit some of the third world countries and gain perspective on how much of the rest of the world lives, just to have an appreciation for what we actually have here in our country. And I think they would be much more grateful for it. I remember we had just done the invasion of Iraq, and I was on Taji base setting up the Iraqi Army Engineer School. So we were just starting this, and they were just having their very first election since the regime of Saddam Hussein had fallen. And these soldiers were so excited. They were dressed up in their best uniforms. They were marching in formation and singing cadence and very upbeat because they were going to vote, right? They were heading out. They were going to go vote for the first time in a free and open election. And to prevent voter fraud over there, what they do is they dip their finger into indelible ink.
Right.
So they all came back with purple fingers showing that they voted.
That was such a great, I remember seeing it on TV, everybody raising their hands, but they're showing their fingers, you know, look what we did. You know, that's awesome.
And they were so excited. Now, to put that into perspective, they were taking on real danger. There were a number of polling stations that got bombed during that election, right? So they were knowingly going out, putting themselves into harm's way in order to exercise their right to vote. Tracy, we do that just by putting a piece of mail in the mailbox.
Right.
We have it so good and so easy here. Someone asked me once when I was overseas, this was when I was in Afghanistan, and they said, "Oh, you're an American." They said, "You must be rich." And I said, "Well, no, I'm not rich." And they said, "Well, at your house, do you have running water?"
Yeah, right.
And I was like, "Well, yeah, I do." So, I mean, perspective matters a whole lot. So whenever you come down on America, yes, we have our faults. We've had our sins of slavery, and we've had other sins that I believe we paid a heavy price for via the lives lost in the Civil War. And we fought for the freedoms of people of all creeds, colors, religions in our nation. And I think that's something that we should be proud for. We should be proud of, while acknowledging that we still have room to improve.
That's Senator Chris Gildan. I'm Tracy Ellis. This is The Elephant in the Dome, the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus.